I just wanted to put together a fairly brief little slide presentation here and kind of combine two concepts, PLCs and formative assessment. Obviously, I won't get very detailed on either one of those broad topics. I've mentioned before that I'm such a fan of PLCs, and of course, the four main tenets of that, the fourth one was added in a few years after it was first developed, are there before you. What is it that we want students to be able to know and do? How will we know when they get there? What will we do when they do not get there? And what do we do if they are already there? That first one, what is it that we want students to be able to know and do? You know, we've spent some time looking at viable curriculum, as Marzano would put it. We've talked about how standards are probably too numerous and they need to be distilled. The best way to do that, in my opinion, is with PLCs. They need to maybe be the people or the bodies in your district that unwrap standards and help people develop unit plans from them. They need to refine that down to the essential knowledge and skills for the course or the grade level that they are representing. That second one, how will we know when they get there? Obviously, we're going to have some assessments in place that do that, both formative and summative, probably even some intermediate type assessments. PLC teams collaboratively develop assessments to determine what students have learned. Most of those are going to be formative in nature, although it's possible that some PLCs develop, let's say, end of the term tests, maybe semester exams, that kind of thing that would be more summative. What will we do when they don't get there? I really think that's the defining moment in a school, is who takes the responsibility. And if the school throws up its hands and says, well, other kids in the past have learned with that same lesson, that was the fault of the students, then that tells you a lot about where that district is or where that school is. The values of the school come strongly into play when you're analyzing that. You'll see that some schools, to avoid this problem, have policies like there will be no zeros. Students are not allowed to have a zero on assignments. Even if they're late, they absolutely have to do the work. There are no free passes. Those kinds of things spring from that partnership approach between teachers and students, that we are both responsible for the learning. And then the last one that was added, as I said somewhat later, is kind of key to the idea of student engagement. If a teacher is in front of a class that already knows a concept and is bound and determined to teach it anyway, that makes for a long and tedious class period in lots of cases, and I have seen that happen. I've actually seen it happen more often in elementary schools, where a teacher might have a pet unit that she has developed, and even though all the kids give every bit of evidence that they already know the stuff, the teacher just proceeds with the unit anyway. And I've seen an otherwise engaged bunch of little third graders just kind of come apart as a result. My first exposure to PLC in action was actually at Stevenson High School, as I've described to you. I was there for a whole week, but the first Monday morning I was there, I got to attend a PLC of Algebra 1 teachers at Stevenson High School. As you might expect in high schools, great as Stevenson is, it gives in to some of the customs of all of us, and that is that most of those Algebra 1 teachers were very young. They had not yet been there long enough to kind of work their way up the ladder, so to speak, to get some of the more advanced classes. But they were very enthusiastic about where they were. And what they were doing that day, there were probably about a dozen of them. You have to understand that school has about 4,300 students. So these young algebra teachers were in a discussion about a formative assessment that they had developed collaboratively about measurement. And they were so into it, I can't begin to describe it to you. They had complete enthusiasm, complete engagement. There was no administrator in sight. No one was facilitating the meeting. There was no obvious leader. There was lively debate. There was even some arguing. There was one young woman whose students had obviously done better than any of the others, and they were really picking her brain about how she had developed her lesson plans to bring that about. It was one of the most exciting things I've ever seen, and I'll tell you right now, I was hooked on it immediately after seeing that. There are some problems that emerge, in my opinion, in various schools and school districts deciding they're going to go the route of PLCs. And I don't want to have you think that I'm really critical of everybody around here. I won't pretend to know what's going on. But I think in far too many cases that I've seen, PLCs are that in name only. And sometimes they're kind of taken over by the curriculum people at the central office, and they're used to get committees or groups of people together to write curriculum maps, which I think is a valuable exercise, but I don't think that's exactly what a PLC does. I would also tell you that I heard the principal at Stevenson High School give a presentation wherein he said that in his opinion, middle school teams are not PLCs. I know there would be some people who would really want to argue that, but I would tend to agree because I think middle school teams are great concepts. I think they really serve a purpose in a really good, sound middle school philosophy. But they're more about talking about individual kids and how they fit in with the team and so forth than they are about the actual curriculum. I think the PLC thing is designed to have teachers who teach the same curriculum and thus have become experts on teaching that curriculum in that school or in that school system. Those are the people that are meeting and constitute a PLC. Now, please, in no way am I disparaging middle school team concept. I think it's great. I've upheld that. I've spent money on it. I've gotten myself in a jam with people over it in supporting it. So I believe in it totally. But I don't think it's a PLC exactly. PLCs don't function best when they're driven from the top down. That is for sure. If they're too rigidly managed, they just don't seem to work well. Administrators have to carve out time for them. You cannot expect teachers to do those things on their own after school in independent fashion. And the thing that really is the kicker that just gripes some people, they just can't get over it, is they're never finished. Lots of people have a style where they just want to check things off their list. They're kind of saying to us, leave me alone so I can get back in my classroom and teach. And that is what we're trying to blow up, is that kind of isolationist philosophy. We're trying to get rid of that totally. And so there has to be an understanding that no, we're in this for the long haul. We'll always be getting a new crop of kids. We'll probably be changing our team. So the circumstances are going to change all the time, and there's going to be new learning all the time. I'd like to make just a few comments on formative assessment. It's really more about the process of finding out what students know, and if you need to make adjustments as an instructor, than it is about a particular instrument. In fact, there doesn't even need to be an instrument. They can be, but there doesn't have to be. The best source that I could refer you to is a book that's in your bibliography on your syllabus. It's called Embedded Formative Assessment by Dylan William. And it's really a state-of-the-art reading about formative assessment. It's written in terms that we can all understand. You could read that book and get started on the practices the next day, and I think really make a significant difference. He puts forward 5 strategies in the book, goes through examples, tells you exactly how he thinks those are best done. What I really like is he tells you how they are sometimes mistakenly implemented also. But he talks about clarifying, sharing, and understanding learning intentions, eliciting evidence of learners' achievement, providing feedback that moves learners forward, activating students as instructional resources for one another, and activating students as owners of their own learning. I think that last one is a really high level thing to which we should aspire, and it really speaks to that partnership that Fullen is advocating in his book. William makes a key point that writing really effective formative assessments is hard, and that's why a team effort is most appropriate. There's more perspectives almost always, and that causes a better technique. It's a hard concept to get across to teachers that they should get in a group. It seems like it takes up too much time when they could easily write some questions that they're going to use in class by themselves. But once they get it and they understand how the devil's advocate or the critical friend thing works, they really get it, and then they usually like it. Here's a great example from the Chico Unified School District in California about how a group of Spanish teachers in a PLC wrote a formative assessment question, just one question, to determine what's the correct translation for "I give the book to him." And then you can see that they gave 6 different selections. Well, the beauty of that question is that The teachers of Spanish know that the problems that English speakers have with learning the Spanish language is difficulties in learning about pronouns, which pronoun to choose and where to place it in the sentence. And so that test item actually takes a whole bunch of the various mistakes that are commonly made by English speakers and provides those as items in the test, in the question. And that will stand the test of time. Those teachers have presented that question in national conferences. They've talked about how long it took them to develop it. And it's certainly true that one Spanish teacher could probably go through and write an item much quicker, but it probably wouldn't be of that kind of quality. This question, on the other hand, might be asked as a pre-test type thing, but it would not tell the teacher much about what the students really knew unless the teacher learned about their reasoning to get the answer. This question is fairly simple. In which year did World War II begin? You might think that's a pretty straightforward question, but if we were to ask it in Europe, we'd probably get a very different answer than we would get here in Colorado. There would be scholars that would advocate that 1937 is the answer because of the Second Sino-Japanese War. There would be various scholars who would argue for different dates of those selections. So just to ask that question and then see the answers and then say, oh, they do know this or they don't know this, would probably not be very effective. What would be effective is to ask the question to provoke discussion and then listen to the rationale of the kids. Now that might be tough to do in a class of 30, so you could break them into groups and then let them process with each other about why they think one of those certain dates is the correct answer. Then you would want to practice what Michael Schmoker advocates, and that is wander around and be an eavesdropper on those group activities. You learn a lot in the formative assessment process by listening in on the cooperative groups, whether it's a pair and share thing or a full group of 4 or some other way that you've configured the class. The worst thing you can do, in my opinion, during a group activity like that, a community learning thing like that, is to go sit at your desk or to disappear from the classroom. Sadly, I have seen teachers do that, and it's just not effective at all. Skillful questioning is perhaps the single most critical piece of the formative assessment thing, and Williams says we should ask questions for only one of 2 reasons, either to cause thinking in our students or to provide us as teachers with information to use in our decision-making process. All notable authors on the topic write of the importance of not allowing the practice of calling on those who raise their hands for answers. That's a key element that causes disengagement. And you know that, it's just common sense. If I ask a question and the kids get into the rhythm with me of knowing that every day I'm going to ask a question, give a little wait time, then call on the people who raise their hand, when those kids don't want to participate or when they don't know the answer or when they're just completely disengaged, they're not worried about it because they know they're not on the line. The practice of calling on raised hands actually widens the learning gap. It puts distance between the kids who know and the kids who don't know. And it's really inexcusable to continue using that practice with all the research telling us not to. Williams makes a distinction between learning and context of learning, and he shows how that can even be confusing to students. If a teacher teaches students to add fractions with a worked example, like 1/2 plus 3/5, then she's no longer interested in their ability to add 1/2 and 3/5 after they're finished with that. She wants to know if they can transfer that newly found knowledge to a reasonably similar but different pair of fractions. Same thing in language arts. When we get students to correct punctuation on their final draft, we're looking beyond that piece of writing now, and we hope they can transfer that learning to other pieces of writing. We have to be able to distinguish between intended learning outcomes and instructional activities that we hope will result in those outcomes. Some teachers really struggle with that. Now, I'll try to show you what I mean. Here's a confused learning objective: to be able to write instructions for changing a bicycle tire. Now here's a clarified one: to be able to write clear instructions. Now the context of that learning might be changing a bicycle tire. I hope you can see the difference. I'll show you one more example. It's a confused learning objective to say, to know what the local priest does. A clarified learning objective for that might be to know the duties and responsibilities of religious leaders. And the context of that learning might be the local priest. When you, as an instructional leader, ask a teacher what her learning intentions are for a given class period, you don't want to hear, I'm going to give the students, or I'm going to have the students fill in the blank. When the teacher is giving you an activity in place of a learning objective, there's a confused rationale going on. That's why teaching is so hard. It's relatively easy to think up cool stuff to have kids do with an activities-based approach, but it's not often clear what the students are to have learned. That's the rationale behind the backward planning concept of learning by design that we've kind of alluded to in the past and some of you have written about in a great way. Thanks for your attention, and we'll move on with the unit.